Welcome to The Explainer. We're about to explore the weapon that ended World War II, a weapon whose destructive power was unleashed in a countdown that lasted less than a minute, but which changed our world forever. That's Japan's Emperor Hirohito in his historic address to the nation announcing their surrender. That new and most cruel bomb he mentioned didn't just end a war. It blasted open the door to a brand new and, frankly, terrifying era. So let's get into the story of how it all went down. Now, to really understand why a weapon like this was even on the table, we have to go back. We need to put ourselves in the headspace of the final brutal stages of World War II, a conflict that had already caused unimaginable devastation. Okay, so by the summer of 1945, the war in Europe is over. All eyes turn to the Pacific. The Allies are gearing up for this massive, bloody invasion of Japan's home islands. But, at the same time, something else is happening in the background. The Manhattan Project succeeds. Suddenly, there's a new, terrifying option. So they issue an ultimatum: surrender unconditionally, or face, and this is the direct quote, prompt and utter destruction. Japan ignores it. And with that, a secret clock starts ticking. And this, right here, is the impossible math that American leaders were staring at. I mean, look at these numbers. A conventional ground invasion, Operation Downfall, was projected to cause casualties in the millions, not just for the Allies, but for Japanese civilians and soldiers too. It would have been a horrific bloodbath. And when you put that next to the bomb, well, you can see the grim logic that some were using. It was a choice between two truly terrible outcomes. So the decision to use the bomb took weeks. The consequences, as we'll see, would last for decades. But the actual event, the thing that ended the war, it all happened with a speed that is just, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. Picture this. It's a clear Monday morning. The B-29 bomber, the Enola Gay, is flying high over the city of Hiroshima. At exactly 8:15 a.m., a single bomb, codenamed Little Boy, drops from its belly. For 43 seconds, it just falls. Think about that. Almost a full minute of complete silence as this object plummets toward the city, carrying a power that no human had ever unleashed before. And then it's over. After that 43-second fall, the nuclear fission reaction, the thing that releases all that energy, it begins and completes in less than 1/millionth of a second. It's a slice of time so small, it's basically zero.
In just 1 second. A fireball a third of a mile wide inflates to its maximum size, and the temperature on the ground instantly hits thousands of degrees. Anything and anyone near the center is just gone, vaporized in a single second.
You know, for the survivors on the ground, the very first thing they experienced wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a sound, it was light. They called it Pika, a brilliant, totally silent, blinding flash that literally burned shadows onto pavement. And only after that silent flash came the done. A massive, deafening boom. That was the shockwave, moving faster than the speed of sound, hitting the city like a physical wall, flattening almost everything for over a mile. Just let that sink in. The war went on for years. The bomber's mission took hours, but the moment that changed everything was over in the time it takes for your heart to beat once. This incredible, concentrated release of energy is what makes this weapon so uniquely horrifying in all of human history. Okay, so you have these few seconds of physics that wipe a city off the map. How does that translate into the end of a war? Well, the immediate fallout was almost as dramatic. So, 16 hours after the bomb hit Hiroshima, President Truman issued this stark public warning. But Japan's military leadership, they were stunned. Some were in denial. They didn't surrender. The war wasn't over yet. And that reign of ruin Truman talked about, this is what it looked like. On the left, a bustling part of Hiroshima. On the right, the exact same spot after the bomb. Within about 1.5 miles of the Hippocenter, over 90% of the buildings were just gone. But still, no surrender. It's hard to believe, but the deadlock in Tokyo held. So 3 days later, on August 9th, the world shook twice. First,
The Soviet Union declared war and invaded Manchuria, a huge blow. Then, just hours later, a second atomic bomb, Fat Man, destroyed the city of Nagasaki. It was this 1-2 punch, what historians call the twin shocks, that finally broke the stalemate and forced Japan's leadership to act.
The explosions might have lasted for mere seconds, but the shadow they cast, politically, socially, personally, stretches all the way into our world today. And to this day, the decision to use the bomb is one of history's biggest, most passionate debates. On one side, you have people who argue it was a brutal but necessary choice to save millions of lives by avoiding that invasion. On the other, you have critics who say it was a fundamentally immoral act, a war crime even, and that Japan was about to surrender anyway, maybe because of the Soviet invasion alone. There are no easy answers here. The story, of course, didn't end in 1945. America's monopoly on the bomb was short-lived. Just 4 years later, the Soviet Union tested their own. And that lit the fuse on the Cold War arms race, a terrifying standoff where both superpowers built enough nuclear weapons to destroy the entire planet many, many times over.
And for the people on the ground, the legacy was deeply personal. The survivors, known as Hibakusha in Japan, suffered for the rest of their lives from cancers and other illnesses. They, and even their children, faced discrimination because of fears and misunderstanding about radiation. But, and this is incredible, out of all that pain, Hiroshima rebuilt itself. It didn't just become a city again. It became a global symbol for peace, a leading voice calling for the end of all nuclear weapons.
So that's what we're left with. In our own time, with our own threats, how does this story, the story of a city erased in a second, in its long, painful journey back, how does it still speak to us? It's a powerful warning and a complex lesson we are all still trying to learn. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.